Доброго ранку усім. Good morning. So first of all, I would like to thank for your kind invitation and opportunity to present an abstract of my dissertation project. With a special focus on German repertoire in Nazi-occupied Ukraine, this dissertation is contributing to the ongoing international research project. The reception of Beethoven and his music in Nazi-occupied Europe, which Professor Michael Pustodis established at the University of Münster in cooperation with Beethoven House in Bonn. It will be interesting to learn, by comparing the Ukraine to other Nazi-occupied territories and countries, how unique or similar the attempts of Nazi authorities were to conquer musical relations toward Germany, which had been established over decades, and to erase previous Soviet influences in the cultural life in Eastern Europe countries. The outbreak of the Russian invasion on February 24, 2022 not only demonstrated a rising interest to Ukrainian history and music, but also a huge lack of knowledge, especially concerning the years during the Second World War. One major obstacle of previous historiography is that all studies which have been written during the Soviet years follow a distinct political agenda, so that their arguments and results often are difficult to evaluate. Other research since 1940 was maintained by various Ukrainian organizations and authors abroad, such as Volodymyr Kubiyovich or Mikhail Leshko. Accordingly, the major improvement to literature could be witnessed after Ukrainian liberation. Another major obstacle for my own research is the remarkable preference of historical research for military and social aspects during the years 1941 and 44. Even if cultural aspects attached upon music was still of a minor interest. One famous exception in the field of theatre, opera particular, is the work of Valery Haidabura. Strikingly, the examples of music is a very fertile area to demonstrate the improvement of Ukrainian musicology from the Soviet years to recent times, as well as reconstruct the cultural life during the Nazi occupation. Also, you please have to consider that my own research started only half a year ago, and for obvious reasons could be based on material from Ukrainian archives yet, except online searches, especially National Library in Ukraine. I will try to summarize major trends, important German stuff, and influential Ukrainian artists that shaped the years 1941 to 1944. Historical overview. After having attacked the Soviet Union in June 1941, the German authorities established the so-called Reichskommissariat Ukraine, formerly controlled by NSDAP ideologist Alfred Rosenberg and led by Erich Koch, later in Königsberg. Their main policies included the persecution and annihilation of all Jewish inhabitants, the enslavement of the local population, as well as the colonization of the region according to the ideology of Lebensraum im Osten. In consequence, the Nazi regime had two intentions to support, develop, or enhance Ukrainians' cultural life at first. Moreover, according to Volodymyr Kosik, Russian immigrants that were based in Berlin in 1941 subverted any Ukrainian attempts for independence by trying to convince the German authorities of the Russian homogeneity in the Soviet Union, so that any idea of national Ukrainian identity was a contradiction per se. However, an intensive study of historical newspapers, a critical assessment of historical literature, and digitalized searches draw a different and very heterogeneous picture of the music life in Reichskommissariat Ukraine. On the one hand, the German authorities under Erich Koch established propaganda programs mainly for the Wehrmacht and their staff and maintained institutions for so-called German-friendly population in cities of Galicia, such as Lviv, which considered to be more culturally developed. On the other hand, due to active military operations and strong repressive actions against Soviet partisans, all cultural activities in regions such as Kharkiv in Ost had to be abandoned until in June 1942. Opera performances and regular concerts were re-established. Let me explain the complex situation in the more detail, including the Ukrainian point of view. The beginning of the occupation in 1941 was marked by a certain rise in Ukrainian music compared to the previous year. The repertoire of Kiev Opera and other opera houses now saw the return of Mykola Lysenka Utoplena and Taras Bulba, Mykola Arkas Katerina, Valentin Kostenko Karmeluk, and Anatoly Vahnyany Kupalo. Newspaper searches report a large number of concerts by bandura players and evenings of Ukrainian songs, including performances of works by Yakov Stepovy, Mykola Leontovich, Mykola Lysenko, Vasil Barvinskii, Stanislav Ludkevisch, and others. Music schools and conservatories continue to operate in numerous cities, and sometimes even the German authorities claim the intention of having restored the domestic cultural activities, of course, according to their own political agenda. Furthermore, evenings of German music were organized in almost every occupied city, with the participation of both Ukrainian and German artists. Now, German directors were in charge of major opera houses such as Wolfgang Bruckner in Kiev, Fritz Weidlich in Lviv, Siegfried Wolfer in Poltava, and Tony Grashberger in Yusivka, now Donetsk. One outstanding result was a staging of Beethoven opera Fidelio in Poltava in 1942, and it seems to be, according to the last information, the second performance in occupied Europe after Paris. In the following season, 1942-43, the Kiev Opera House staged Richard Wagner, Lohengrin, Meistersinger, and Tannhäuser after classics like Giuseppe Verdi, La Traviata and Aida, Giacomo Puccini, Madame Butterfly, and Giorgio Bizet, Carmen, had been presented in various cities already. Between the years 1941 and 43, Ukrainian publications regularly featured articles about prominent German composers, including Mozart, Beethoven, Wagner, and Brahms, and often the genius of these German icons was utilized for comparisons with Ukrainian artists, such, for example, Mykola Lysenka and his connection to the Leipzig School. Often the authors of these articles were members of the Ukrainian National Association, like Roman Brzezki, or patriotic musicologists and composers including Vasil Barvinskii, Miroslav Duda, and Boris Kudryk. As much as searchers can tell us so far, the cooperation of Ukrainian artists with the German authorities can be divided into several groups. Some use the new political circumstances as an ideological advantage to promote Ukrainian culture and label it as an independent and anti-Soviet project. They could benefit from the fact that Ukrainian music was present in West European stages for many years. One place of special interest was Vienna, where many Ukrainian artists had studied at the conservatory since the beginning of the 20th century. Many of them achieved considerable success, such as pianist Taras Mikishin, singer Mikhailo Duda, and Theodor Yushkivteru. Other artists simply tried to continue their work by agreeing to give concerts for Ukrainian and German audiences. Example are the composers Vasil Barvinskii and Stanislav Ludkevisch, singers Daria Bandrivska and Ivanitska, as well as pianist Daria Karanovich. Nevertheless, a lot of artists collaborated, many of them reacting to the pressure of making a living as a musician during war times. One such striking example is the famous opera singer Boris Hmyra. His fate during the occupation was widely covered in the book Theatre Between Hitler and Stalin by Valery Haidabura, who had access to Hmyra's archival papers and private information. According to Haidabura, the artist, due to his poor health, had been unable to leave Ukraine right in time, so that he was forced to adapt to the new realities. To his disadvantage, the German authorities had notice of Hmyra's talent and forced him to work first in the theatre of Kharkiv and later in Poltava. According to his own account, his repertoire was not extensive. In each concert, he performed either one song or one aria, in particular the parts of Rocco from Fidelio, Mephistopheles from Faust, and Kalin from La Bohème. Strikingly, Hmyra managed to convince the Soviet authorities after 1945 that he remained a faithful and loyal Soviet citizen nevertheless. In a letter to Khrushchev, who was at that time a member of the political bureau of the Central Committee and unofficial Stalin's right hand, Boris Hmyra admitted that despite constant requests from this Nazi to send him on a tour to Germany, he was forced to refuse 3 times, which each time only made the occupiers' attitude towards him worse. The artist also mentioned the difficult conditions many of his colleagues had to experience, so that many of his friends starved to death. After having survived the occupation and not been declared an enemy of the people by Soviet authorities, Boris Mira was awarded the title of People's Artist in the USSR in 1951. Nevertheless, the suspicion of having been a Nazi collaborator never fully disappeared, so the authorities kept him under constant control. According to his wife, the situation deteriorated his weak health, which contributed to his early death in 1969 at the age of 63. Not every artist remained at home after the Germany occupation had ended. Instead, many Ukrainian artists who had collaborated openly with the Nazi regime left Ukraine, but nevertheless continued to represent Ukrainian culture abroad. This became an important factor to preserve national heritage and rare musical samples after World War II, which was hard to do after the recovery of Soviet rule in the Ukraine in 1944. Accordingly, the evaluation which kind of cooperation was considered as a judgmental support of an occupying force is a complicated matter, even more so due to the Soviet dominance of politics and historiography between 1917 and 1991, with the exception of 4 years of German control. On one hand, several artists maintained their commitment to Ukrainian national music where they stayed during the years of occupation or if they left and performed, for example, in Vienna or Berlin, which would indicate a predominantly artistic intention. On the other hand, there are quite clear indications of Ukrainian artists actively supporting German propaganda organizations such as Kraft der Freude. As far as I can say from my own studies of sources, there is the only one name confirmed case of collaboration, namely by the pianist Ludka Kolessa. A graduate of the Vienna Conservatory, she had toured Germany successfully since 1922. Known as a brilliant Chopin performer, she gave 2 recitals under the patronage of KRF in July in 1939. One evening, even in alliance with the famous Beethoven enthusiast and Hitler admirer Eleonora. For unknown reasons, however, she left for Canada in 1940 and kept up her performing career. In contrast to her former connection to Nazi German, now Ukrainian and American newspapers credit her as an independent artist. Strikingly, another member of the Kolessa family can be convicted of active support for Nazi Germany based on historical newspapers articles. Cellist Christa Kolessa, Ludka's sister, toured Germany and the Netherlands between 1941 and 1943 and also came to Lviv. There she gave a number of interviews for Vasil Barvinskii, who repeatedly expressed his admiration for a Ukrainian cellist who could compete with colleagues on a European scale. So far is unclear if she did cooperate with KRF like her sister did. One of the posters in Berlin stated that she was performing under the patronage of the Ukrainian National Organization. The nature of this organization and its connect to Nazi organization so far is unclear and demands further archival researches. As mentioned earlier, all activities of Ukrainian musicians during the few years of the German occupation, either staying in Ukraine or living for an exile in the West or under Soviet protection, has to be seen in the broader setting of the years prior and post the years 1941 and 1944. The example of a Soviet elite composer who created a significant work based on traditional Ukrainian motifs is Boris Lyatoshinsky. Between 1942 and 1943, he wrote a number of chamber works referring to national subjects, in particular his Ukrainian quintet and his trio number 2 for piano, violin, and cello. In 1944, he continued this series with a suite for string quartet based on Ukrainian folk chants. The remarkable intensity and quantity of Ukrainian musical initiative in Russia territory during the Second World War do not equal a distant Soviet commitment to cultural diversity. As it seems, the tolerance against Ukrainian music might have been of a strategic relevance for Moscow, maybe to compete Nazi Germany's claiming of the Ukrainian territory, including all cultural heritage. One example could be attention that pro-German newspapers in Ukraine paid to composer Boris Lyatoshinsky, who was evacuated in 1941, and continue arranging Ukrainian songs while teaching orchestration at the conservatories in Moscow and Saratov. But now we can see a newspaper that was in Lviv and Lubinsk Vestnik. So it's really bright example. It is important to know that after the victory over Hitler Germany, the working condition of Ukrainian music in Soviet Union remained difficult. Most of them had to arrange themselves with permanent surveillance of the official administration and secret service, which restricted pro-Ukrainian activities according to doctrines of official Soviet cultural propaganda. Artists who had emigrated towards Western Europe and overseas to the United States and Canada experienced much easier conditions to preserve and promote Ukrainian culture and music in particular. Accordingly, a large number of ensembles and capellas, such as Shevchenko Bandura Capella that had been formed during the war, continue their activities in America. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I guess the short overview demonstrated the necessity and extent of research that needs to be done before one can get a detailed impression of Ukrainian music life during the years of the German occupation. This accounts for Nazi policies of censorship, propaganda, radio, official festivities and Fallstunden, the role of military music and troop entertainment, as well as the consequences of the extension of the Jewish culture and the activities of exiled musicians. Thank you for attention. Дякую.